Welcome, fellow and future metalheads, to The Metal Substance, a series about metal music and its history, created for the purpose of discussing serious music in a serious way. I'm your host, call me Victor. I hope you're relaxing with something to drink. Today we are talking about an album from 1981, Venom's Welcome to Hell. If you're watching this, I probably sent you here from another video about an extreme metal band. This is meant as your primer on the early history of Venom and how they became the starting gun for a new era in metal's history. Again and again, you are going to hear Venom cited as an influence by black metal, death metal, and thrash metal bands. So, who are they and why are they such a big deal in terms of metal's development? Well, in simple terms, Venom represents the climax of the new wave of British heavy metal, while simultaneously being the foundation for the three previously mentioned forms of metal: death, thrash, and black metal. We'll get more into all that after some historical background and getting into the music. We're going to start with today's daily digression early. Venom was formed in the United Kingdom, 1979. Now, the United Kingdom at the time was going through the winter of discontent and general economic hardships. The phrase winter of discontent is a reference to the opening of Shakespeare's Richard III, in which the future Richard III makes a speech commemorating the end of civil war. It wasn't, by the way. That starts with the phrase, "Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer." More pertinent for our purposes is the winter of 1978 to 1979. This was coming as Britain had been struggling with years of economic challenges. Inflation was up over 20%, real economic growth was slow, unemployment was on the rise, labor disputes were becoming a regular occurrence. This was compounded when the 1976 sterling crisis happened, when the government took the largest loan up to that point from the International Monetary Fund, and there was also the cutting of government expenditures. This last thing was a violation of what was colloquially known as the social contract. In this particular case, the social contract was that trade unions in Britain, much stronger than their equivalents in America, would accept a limit on wage increases. What the workers were supposed to get in return for this is a government that would engage in social welfare and worker protections. If you wanted to think about this on an individual level, it would be like you agree with your boss not to get a cost of living raise this year, but in exchange, he would pay for your doctor's visits and prescription medication. Well, you can only keep having inflation rising faster than wages for so many years before people are going to start having a problem with it. Even an illiterate truck driver from the Welsh border could see that this 20% inflation and 5% raise each year, if he got one at all, wasn't going to be sustainable. So when the government tried to limit wages in 1978 to just 5% increases, the unions had reached their limits and workers began walking off the job. There were too many strikes to list here, but here are the broad strokes. Workers from several vital public and private sectors were walking off the job to strike. I'm talking truck and lorry drivers, the schools were closing, public sanitation, hospital workers, and on and on and on. Even the grave diggers went on strike in Liverpool. The government had to start storing unburied bodies in a local factory, which is probably too strong a metaphor. That one only lasted 2 weeks before they got a 14% raise. As you can imagine, the public had been very disturbed about the idea of these corpses piling up. So then November brings with it the start of a severe winter, the third coldest of the entire 20th century, which exacerbated all of the above issues. And this leads to a crisis in the government, a vote of no confidence, an election which is going to lead to the rise of a certain Miss Margaret Thatcher Milk Snatcher, and she's going to run Britain throughout the 1980s, and that is going to lead Britain on such a path that her grave is now Britain's most visited public toilet. So, what was I talking about? Oh, right, Venom. So it's in this sort of environment that Venom forms in Newcastle. In what will become tradition in black metal circles, especially, all three members of the band take assumed names to perform under. On bass and vocals, we have Kronos, aka Conrad Lant. On guitar is Mantis, aka Jeffrey Dunn. And finally, on drums is Abaddon, aka Tony Bray. Now, let's get the obvious out of the way. These three were not exactly virtuoso musicians. Kronos himself has said that technical perfection was never the goal, and they certainly made up for that lack of technical ability with an unquenchable raw energy. Now, Kronos worked at Impulse Studio, which was important because it gave him access to recording equipment after hours. And so, in the time that the band had, they could record demos that showed this style developing. It was something that had a real punk aesthetic to it, too. There's a lot of speed, ferocity, and so much theatrical, satanic imagery. These demos that they made eventually made their way over to Neat Records, where when the label boss David Wood at the time heard them, he decided, you know what? These are good enough to release as is. And I think they pretty much did release them as is. The album sounds like a demo because the microphones are kind of peaking a bit. The bass is very fuzzy and buzzy. They're kind of not always in time. Things sound really distorted sometimes when I listen to Welcome to Hell. And it makes me wonder, am I listening to like a specific wax recording that was digitized after it melted somewhere? There's really not a whole lot of editing. There's not a whole lot of multi-tracks at play here. And typically all of these things I've been listing would be seen as shortcomings. Instead, it ends up defining the band's identity and creates a style of musical production which generations now of black metal musicians especially are going to attempt to be imitating. And so this group of basically amateurs making a poorly produced record sounds like something that today's sound engineers slave over to create the sound. Uh, you know, it's so bad it's good, and that makes it authentic. A lot of quotation marks here. So, Welcome to Hell, in terms of metal history, at this point, metal had, as we think of metal today, was now over a decade old. Uh, and heavy metal had started to exaggerate its own characteristics. The fast music was going faster. In Venom's case, sometimes so fast the band themselves can't seem to keep up. The vocals on this record are harsher than you'd see elsewhere in metal. It's not full blown death metal. It's not going to really happen for a few years until we get to stuff like Scream Bloody Gore. Um, the guitar work, it's very heavily distorted. It's sometimes hard to pick out the riffs in this. And overall, there's just a general dark atmosphere. And there's really not an interest in melody. Let's take Motorhead, for example, which I always love to do. They do ballads, but most of their music is real rock and roll. And Lemmy, he's not singing, he's barking, he's growling. And that's what Kronos is doing here as well. The guitar solos on Welcome to Hell, not David Gilmour's work. They're noisy, frenetic notes squeezed into too tight of a space, and you are not going to hear the most technical of drumming, we'll say, from Abaddon. Instead, there's this sense that the beat has to continue at all times to be ferocious. And that sort of energy is much more important than literally getting the count right. And there's a lot of traditional blues still on this record when you get right down to it. Listen to Schizo or 1000 Days of Sodom at half or three quarters speed, and it becomes an older genre of music. Honestly, for me, 1000 Days of Sodom at 0.75 speed is like the best Black Sabbath song you haven't heard of. Let's really get into more of the music talk. This is a rock and roll record. It's just evil and occult covered. It's like the Rocky Horror Picture Show had left a song on the cutting room floor when you listen to some of this stuff. The lyrics in these songs are very, very concerned with Satan and death and violence. Let's look at the lyrics to In League with Satan, for example. I'm in league with Satan. I was raised in hell. I walk the streets of Salem amongst the living dead. I need no one to tell me what's right or right. I drink the blood of children, stalk my prey at night. And so, speaking of Satan, This is as good a time as any to talk about the imagery of the album and the band as a whole. But the album's art cover art itself. You see, of course, that there is this huge invented pentagram. Good Lord, I will not get into all the pentagram's meanings, which are including but not limited to the five holy wounds of Christ, to the Holy Spirit. But more importantly, this is a pentacle because it has a circle around it, in the middle of which is the head of Baphomet. Baphomet is a reference to many things. It refers to some sort of demon, especially that the Knights Templar were accused of worshiping and engaging in heresy with. It's a symbol that has been around anywhere from at least 700 to 1,000 years, depending on who you're asking. Apparently, there's a letter from like 1098 that mentions Baphomet, but it could be one of those things where it's a typo or it's in reference to something else, because it's just there's this huge gap of time before it's ever referenced again. But as you see, these things can all be very confusing, but it's just sort of broadly, we're generally okay. Upside down pentagram, that's a Satan thing. Baphomet, that's a Satan thing. So there's these aesthetics of Satanism that are really importantly on display here. And it's going to be especially important going forward. You got to look like you got some bona fides. You took your little trip to the Halloween store. And this occult imagery is not just limited to the album cover. Their live shows were defined by them dressing in leather and having studs on, wearing chains. There's pentagrams everywhere. There's goat heads everywhere. There's a lot of fire. All of this stuff that we now think of as really cliche. This is them breaking ground on that. And just shut up and do the chant. The evil in league with Satan and all that. So I think that's a broad enough description of the music for our purposes so far. I want to now talk about what I think is even more important than the literal music, and that's what the music inspired. This album has become regarded as a classic, something that I think if you want to be an academic or just have a strong interest in metal music history, it becomes essential listening, in the same way that if you want to talk seriously about like the golden age of Russian literature, you've got to read some Pushkin or at least some Gogol. However, at the time of its release, it was, I think rightfully, scorned by the broader music media because of its muddy production, because it's not precise, because it's not really gifted. The songwriting is a little simplistic. I mean, you could boogie to it, but let me tell you more things about the production. This stuff is really worse than it sounds. If that makes sense. Like the guitar buzzing, you really need to slow down some of these songs to appreciate how muddled things really are. It goes to shit in a hurry. They are playing so fast because they're trying to run away from the clang going through the amps, so you could still hear enough music in there to try and enjoy your little Satan sleepover dance party you're jamming this at. But an underground cult following of the band and the sound did develop. People who were very loyal to this piece of sonic aggression that Venom had poured into Wax. And this is where we're going to talk about how it influenced other genres. Many of the most important early thrash bands were influenced directly by Venom, including Slayer, Metallica, Exodus, Megadeth. They've all talked about their importance. I think you could especially hear this when you listen to Slayer's Hell Awaits, when you listen to Creator's debut album, when you listen to Sodom's and the Sign of Evil. These are all taking from Venom's message that metal could be faster than ever. It could be dirtier than ever. You can make it as loud as you want. You can make it ugly, unrefined. Venom is all about establishing an attitude and a style, not about the literal notes so much. Because I mean, a lot of this stuff is surfer rock, and that's great. The second genre that's going to really be influenced by Venom is going to be death metal, which owes a huge debt to Welcome to Hell because of its harsh vocals. Uh, the speed of it, the way that it's obsessed with darkness, with making you feel nasty, like how you're watching a horror movie in a dark theater. The general frenetic energy is going to cross over into the work of bands like Possessed, Morbid Angel, Death. What those bands are going to do is showcase where this style can go when more technical ability is added to it. And finally, there's black metal. which is so influenced by Venom that some people divide things into a first and second wave of black metal. I am one of those people. Second wave black metal, it is going to be influenced by Venom. Venom's second album is named black metal, which is where the genre name comes from. And there's many touchstones that we look for when we're talking about, well, what is a black metal record? And they can be traced to Venom. The raw production, talking about the occult, the supernatural subject matter, the shrieking, the banshee vocals, as I like to call them. The way that the band almost seems to not really care if you're having a good time right now because it's trying to inflict itself upon you. And there's a deliberate rejection of attempting to be commercial or popular. So the ultimate irony becomes that this is an album that makes up for all of its shortcomings in influence, if not in accomplishment. So let's wrap this up. Why do you need to understand Venom's 1981 debut album when you're listening to a black metal album 35 years later out here? Vile, violent, venomous, a visceral vessel of volume, venom, and volcanic velocity, vindicated by vision rather than virtuosity, three vagabonds from the venerable city of Newcastle ventured beyond the then vocabulary of heavy metal. How? Well, while others valued virtuoso vanity, Venom would venerate viciousness. They weren't virtuosos, they were vandals. Vandals violating every valid convention. Their verses voiced visions of vengeance, vice, and the void. Their violent virations, their vocals veer venom. Volume was warfare, and veiled beneath inverted sigils and villainous visages, they invoked visions of the infernal. Not as venerating devotees, wink, but as vaudeville provocateurs valuing outrage over orthodoxy. Yet for the world, what many dismissed as vulgarities, visionaries viewed as revelation. Within that volatile whirlwind of distortion, listeners witnessed the very volume of possibilities in extremity. Speed found velocity, darkness found vocabulary, metal found venom, and venom would found extreme metal. From those venomous vibrations would emerge vast victories, thrash, death, black, virtually every violent variation that has followed. Visionaries from valleys in California to villages in Norway would venture through the very gates Venom violently forced open. Many would become more virtuosic, many would become more vicious, but none could claim the first victorious volley. For before blast beats and corpse paint, before tremolo picked violence, before the black metal became a movement, there was Venom. Three voices, three vandals, three visionaries. Their debut wasn't merely a vinyl, it was a verdict. A declaration of volatile invitation. Welcome to hell. And from that, verily, heavy metal would never again be viewed the same, for history remembers many victors and never forgets the villains. Okay, 3 songs to really listen to on here. In League with Satan, For the Chant, of course. This album is almost a doom metal album at times. They don't play doom this fast. All right, give 1,000 Days of Sodom a listen, especially for the jam at the end, and Poisonous for listening to while you're on your way to the breakup. In conclusion, whether you enjoy Venom's brand of music or not, they were an explosive force in the metal world whose sound has been foundational for subgenres ranging from Teutonic thrash to Scandinavian black metal to Brazil's Sepultura and much more. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Please let me know anything you think I could do to make these videos better. Other stuff that's going on the channel, hoping to get War Through the Ages restarted here. We're also going to soon be getting more into thrash, that's going to open up a whole. There's a lot of thrash there to go over. Now, remember, there is no substitute for listening to the album yourself. And remember, history will be written by the victor. Oh, actually, one more thing. I mentioned Richard III today. I actually am working on a video about Shakespeare's Richard II, who's the king whose reign plants the seeds, the eventual War of the Roses. That'll probably be coming out sooner rather than later, meaning that I thought I would have to wait for October, but I think it's going to be more like early September, things go well. Okay, remember, history will be written by the victor.